Professor Dr. Rüdiger Bormann, sehr geehrte Vertreter unserer Partneruniversitäten, Privatdozentin Dr. Ivana Rentsch und Privatdozent Dr. Arne Stollberg aus Bern sowie Professor Dr. Nicholas Vazsonyi aus Columbia, USA, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studierende, liebe Vertreter der Presse, hoffe ich doch zumindest, vielleicht kommen die noch später, und natürlich last but not least auch liebe Interessierte aus der Stadt Bayreuth in Sachen Wagner. Seien Sie alle ganz herzlich willkommen zu unserer Eröffnungsveranstaltung zu WagnerWorldWide 2013, das Projekt der Universität zum Jubiläumsjahr dann 2013. Ich bin sehr froh, dass es so weit gekommen ist, dass dieses Projekt nun mit dieser Ringvorlesung heute beginnen kann. Es war ein recht langer Weg hierhin, jetzt aber klappt alles bestens, das kann ich auch sagen und darüber freue ich mich sehr. Und daran waren viele beteiligt. Ich möchte einigen Dank vorab hier schon mal aussprechen, vor allem, weil da war ich besonders nervös, die Technik funktioniert bestens. Wir hatten letzte Woche schon eine Ringvorlesung und das klappt. Sie können auch den Podcast inzwischen sehen von letzter Woche, das funktioniert also sehr gut. Herrn Dr. Neubauer, Dirk Schädlich und Andreas Brütting vom Rechenzentrum, ganz herzlichen Dank dafür, und die uns schon seit Monaten sehr gut betreuen, weil wir haben viel vorher geprobt. Dank aber auch an den Kollegen Betzwieser, mit dem ich die Ringvorlesung zusammen aufgestellt habe, und Sarah Maugsch vom Forschungsinstitut, die als studentische Mitarbeiterin an diesem Projekt beteiligt ist. Dank geht aber ganz besonders auch an die Universitätsleitung, die das Projekt von Anfang an sehr großzügig und auch nachhaltig unterstützt hat und weiterhin fördert. Ganz besonders froh bin ich dann auch natürlich vor allem wegen der Kooperation, die wir mit der Stadt eingehen können in dieser Sache. Die große abschließende Konferenz im Sommer 2013 wird nun von beiden Partnern zusammen durchgeführt werden, also der Stadt und der Universität zusammen. Ihnen, lieber Dr. Hohl, ganz herzlichen Dank für die engagierte Vermittlung in dieser Sache. Da bin ich wirklich sehr froh drüber. Ich freue mich nun sehr auf die kommenden Vorlesungen in den nächsten Wochen und Monaten. Dieses Projekt ist nämlich für das Forschungsinstitut für Musiktheater sowie für die Fachgruppe Musiktheater hier an der Universität sehr wichtig, weil sich gewissermaßen ein Kreis schließt. Eine der Säulen dieser Universität, das hat mir der Gründungspräsident der Universität Bayreuth, Klaus-Dieter Wolf, kurz vor seinem viel zu frühen Tode 2007 mit auf den Weg gegeben. Einer dieser Gründungssäulen ist nämlich der Wunsch oder der ausdrückliche Wunsch, in den 1970er Jahren diesen Musiktheaterschwerpunkt hier einzurichten. Und ideal ist die Konstellation heute in der Fachgruppe, in der ja Theaterwissenschaft und Musikwissenschaft direkt aufeinander bezogen werden und sehr gut zusammenarbeiten, ganz besonders. Das FIMT ist auch in seiner Form weltweit weiterhin einmalig, das gibt es so nicht nochmal in der Form, also das Forschungsinstitut. Und wenn nicht hier in dieser Stadt mit zwei wirklich singulären Theatern, also das Markgräfliche Opernhaus und natürlich das Bayreuther Festspielhaus, wo denn sonst einen solchen Schwerpunkt einrichten und in der Form unterhalten. Diese Art der Profilbildung der 70er Jahre war damals eben sehr weitsichtig und heute, glaube ich, profitieren wir sehr davon in diesem anderen Wettbewerb der Universitäten zu Beginn des 21. Jahrhunderts. Warum schließt sich der Kreis? Zum ersten Mal in jüngerer Zeit, das mag vielleicht ein bisschen paradox klingen, aber es ist tatsächlich so, wird nämlich nun Richard Wagner, also der Ausgangspunkt der Einrichtung des Schwerpunktes hier, zu einem Fokus unserer Arbeit. Dies in einer Art und Weise, dass dieses Phänomen Wagner an unsere Zeit und unsere Diskurse angebunden werden und zugleich einer breiten Öffentlichkeit zur Diskussion gestellt werden sollen. Um es modern und breit aufzustellen, bedienen wir uns der neuen Medien, dem Livestream, dem Podcast auf YouTube, ich habe es eben erwähnt, und vor allem auch der Möglichkeit, dann das Projekt oder die Vorlesungen über Facebook zu kommentieren und hoffentlich auch zu diskutieren. Da ist schon einiges seit letzter Woche passiert. Mein größter Wunsch, beteiligen Sie sich, machen Sie mit. denn dann funktioniert das Projekt. Und bevor ich nun das Wort gleich an Herrn Professor Dr. Rüdiger Bormann, unseren Präsidenten, übergebe, möchte ich Sie noch einladen zu unserem Empfang nachher, nach der Vorlesung um 16 Uhr. Sie sind alle herzlich willkommen, dann noch ein Glas mit uns zu trinken und auch vielleicht schon in die Diskussion einzusteigen. Nach Herrn Bormann wird Herr Dr. Michael Hohl ein kurzes Grußwort sprechen und dann unsere beiden Partner, sodass wir uns um kurz vor 2:30 dann einwählen, um mit South Carolina Kontakt zu bekommen und uns dann in den Livestream, in den Äther der neuen Medien zu begeben. Darf ich Sie bitten, Herr Präsident, und darf ich Ihnen das Mikrofon so in die Hand geben?
Ist vielleicht deutlicher, ne? Ja, lieber Herr Mungen, sehr geehrter Herr Oberbürgermeister Dr. Hohl, sehr geehrter Herr Stollberg aus der Schweiz, sehr geehrter Herr Professor Vazsonyi, sehr geehrte Studierende, ich hoffe, es werden noch ein paar mehr. Also ich bin so ein bisschen enttäuscht. Das bin ich nicht gewohnt aus meiner früheren Tätigkeit als Hochschullehrer, dass so wenig Studierende kommen. Und Frau Danner hatte mir gesagt, letztes Mal waren 70 da. Ich denke, das liegt wahrscheinlich daran, dass nur kommuniziert worden ist, dass es um 14:30 Uhr vorliest. Sie werden einen vollen Hörsaal bekommen. Ich muss hier noch mal ein bisschen toleranter sein. Aber ich habe ja auch gehört, es soll übertragen werden. Es wird übertragen, es ist zumindest eine Live-Schaltung jetzt nach Columbia. Die steht hoffentlich. Und ab 14:30 Uhr wird es dann worldwide übertragen. Wunderbar. Bayreuth ist bekannt als Universitätsstadt und als Festspielstadt. Die Festspielzeit konzentriert sich auf die Werke von Richard Wagner. Die Universität konzentriert sich auf Forschung und Lehre, Ausbildung und Bildung. Aber es gibt eine interessante Schnittmenge, die schon bei der Gründung der Universität von entsprechenden Gutachtern empfohlen worden ist. Und das ist die Musiktheaterforschung, die Herr Mungen eben auch kurz angerissen hat. Das Forschungsinstitut für Musiktheater, jetzt unter der Leitung von Herrn Mungen, führt die beiden sonst oftmals getrennt behandelten Bereiche Musik und Theater zusammen und erforscht seit über 35 Jahren Erscheinungsformen, Produktionsprobleme und Rezeption des Musiktheaters. Der besondere Fokus war natürlich Richard Wagner wohl als Idee vorher. Und es ist natürlich schön, dass das jetzt gerade in dieser Zeit wieder zusammengeführt wird. Im Sinne der Einheit von Forschung und Lehre gibt es an der Universität Bayreuth auch entsprechende Lehr- und Ausbildungsangebote. Möchte ich ausdrücklich darauf hinweisen, hier an dieser Stelle auch ein bisschen Werbung machen. Wir bieten den Bachelor Musiktheaterwissenschaft an und das Master- und Promotionsprogramm Musik und Performance mit durchaus gutem Zuspruch, was die letzten Einschreibungszahlen belegen. Es ist kein Geheimnis, dass die Person und das musikalische und literarische Werk Wagners weltweit polarisieren und zu kontroversen Diskussionen hervorrufen. Also als ich hier angefangen habe, wurde dann auch gefragt, interessieren Sie sich für Wagner? Ja, und dann wollten Sie auch gleich ein Statement haben. Ich glaube, das ist nicht so einfach, ein einfaches Statement zu Wagner geben, und das macht gerade die Komplexität dieser Person aus. Und ich glaube, das ist auch das besondere Interesse daran. Gerade vor diesem Hintergrund sind eine rationale und wissensbasierte Auseinandersetzung, und genau das wollen wir ja an einer Universität fördern, sowie die Behandlung aus unterschiedlichen, insbesondere interkulturellen Perspektiven in einer globalisierten Welt nicht nur kreativ, sondern aus meiner Sicht auch wirklich notwendig. Denn diese Auseinandersetzung stimuliert und intensiviert als Diskussionsplattform den interkulturellen Diskurs um zentrale gesellschaftliche Themen. Dass dabei Richard Wagner in gewisser Weise auch funktionalisiert wird, wird er uns sicherlich verzeihen. Bei der Durchsicht der Referatsthemen sind mir Schwerpunkte aufgefallen, die auch die Universitätsleitung derzeit im Hinblick auf die künftige strategische Auseinandersetzung der Universität beschäftigen. Ich nenne nur die Themen Internationalisierung, Marketing, Gender. Herr Mungen wird mir sicherlich davon erzählen, was Wagner dazu zu sagen hat. Und wir werden das in der Struktur- und Entwicklungsplanung der Universität Bayreuth entsprechend berücksichtigen. Bei der Auseinandersetzung mit dem Phänomen Richard Wagner wollen wir neue Wege gehen. Herr Mungen hat da ja schon darauf hingewiesen. Wir nutzen intensiv die Möglichkeiten des Internets, ich sage schon fast des www 2.0, durchschalten eine Videokonferenz, weltweite Übertragung, YouTube finde ich auch sehr günstig, viele Sachen nachgeguckt, würde mir dann nämlich auch die Gelegenheit geben, die Vorlesung, die ich nicht besuchen kann, dort abends zumindest anzugucken. Und das Nutzen von Facebook als Diskussionsplattform hat sich nicht nur im Politischen bewährt. Es ist natürlich auch gerade für die Geisteswissenschaften durchaus ein neues Experimentiergebiet, was ich nachhaltig unterstützen möchte. Richard Wagner, der auch für revolutionäre Innovationen in der Musik steht, aber auch als medialer Erneuerer gilt, wäre sicherlich auch ebenfalls begeistert. Auch der kostenfreie Zugang, den Richard Wagner ursprünglich ja auch für die Festspiele, Herr Hohl, vorgesehen hatte, fände sicherlich seine Zustimmung. Ich möchte schon jetzt allen Akteuren für das Engagement und den Einsatz danken. Ich bin gespannt über die Ergebnisse und die Erfahrungen mit diesem Projekt, das ja, wie Herr Mungen angedeutet hat, im Jahre 2013, also zum 2. Geburtstag Richard Wagners, mit einer internationalen Konferenz abgeschlossen werden soll. Ich wünsche allen Beteiligten viel Erfolg für dieses herausfordernde Projekt, interessante Ergebnisse und Diskussionsbeiträge und vor allem, dass die Technik hält, was sie versprochen hat. Vielen Dank.
Danke. Muss ich das benutzen wegen einer Aufnahme oder sowas oder brauche ich das nicht? Nur, dass Sie mich verstehen, dann lasse ich das Mikro nämlich weg. Ich sollte es verwenden. Gut, dann verwende ich es gerne. Ist das okay so? Lieber Präsident Bormann, lieber Professor Vazsonyi, sehr geehrte Herren Professoren Mungen und Betzwieser, Spektabilitäten, sehr geehrte Studierende, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Für die Stadt Bayreuth, aber auch aus großem persönlichen Interesse, darf ich Sie alle zum Auftakt der Ringvorlesung WWW 2013 hier an der Universität Bayreuth begrüßen. Komme mir gerne an die alte Wirkungsstätte zurück und heute tue ich das aus besonders gutem Grund. Mit dieser Veranstaltung beginnt schon heute der 200. Geburtstag Richard Wagners 2013 seine Kreise zu ziehen. Ich freue mich sehr, dass die Universität Bayreuth unter der Federführung des Forschungsinstituts für Musiktheater und seines Leiters Professor Mungen und mit ihm Professor Betzwieser der Schauplatz dieser inhaltlich spannenden wie medial überaus wegweisenden Vorlesungsreihe ist. Ohne jeden Zweifel ist Richard Wagner ein globales Kulturphänomen, dessen Zentrum, und das sage ich selbstbewusst als Oberbürgermeister dieser Stadt, dessen Zentrum hier in Bayreuth liegt, im Festspielhaus und im Haus Wahnfried. Diesem Umstand trägt die heute beginnende Vorlesungsreihe auf ebenso bemerkenswerte wie beeindruckende Weise Rechnung, denn sie beleuchtet Wagner nicht nur interdisziplinär und aus unterschiedlichsten Perspektiven, sondern sie bedient sich dabei auch noch heutiger Medientechnik. Wir haben es gehört. Besonders erfreulich ist, dass die Universität Bayreuth und das Forschungsinstitut für Musiktheater mit der University of South Carolina in Columbia, Vereinigte Staaten und der Universität Bern internationale Kooperationspartner gewinnen konnte, wodurch die globale Dimension des Projekts ebenso wie seines Gegenstandes Richard Wagner auf schöne Weise unterstrichen wird. Und ich freue mich auch besonders darüber, dass für die University of South Carolina heute Professor Dr. Nicholas Vazsonyi zu uns gekommen ist und die Ringvorlesung gleich im Anschluss mit einem Vortrag zum Thema The Global Marketing of Wagner eröffnen wird. Seien Sie herzlich willkommen in Bayreuth, lieber Professor Vazsonyi. Schön, dass Sie uns die Ehre geben. Und bitte seien Sie versichert, dass mich Ihr Thema natürlich aus naheliegenden Gründen brennend interessiert. Leider findet am letzten Mittwoch eines Monats immer die Stadtratssitzung statt und die beginnt um 15 Uhr. Deswegen kann ich nicht live dabei sein, aber ich werde mir das natürlich dann auf YouTube ansehen. Mein besonderer und herzlicher Dank gilt auch der Universität Bayreuth, lieber Präsident Bormann, die diese spannende Vorlesungsreihe ermöglicht hat. Ihrem inhaltlich federführenden Forschungsinstitut für Musiktheater und namentlich damit Ihnen, lieber Professor Mungen und lieber Professor Betzwieser, sowie allen Mitgliedern Ihres Teams, die mithelfen, dass alles funktioniert. Wir alle erhoffen uns von den Vorträgen der Reihe wichtige Impulse für die immerwährende Diskussion um Richard Wagner, sein Werk und seine Wirkungen und damit auch einen besonderen Beitrag zum anstehenden Jubiläum im Jahr 2013, in welchem Bayreuth zweifellos im Mittelpunkt des Interesses der weltweiten Wagner-Community stehen wird. Wir arbeiten heftig daran, lieber Dr. Sven Friedrich, dass wir diesem weltweiten mächtigen Anspruch und diesen Erwartungen, die natürlich da auf uns zukommen, wenigstens halbwegs gerecht werden. Mit dem Vorhaben dieser internationalen und interdisziplinären Ringvorlesung tragen Universität und Forschungsinstitut einen wichtigen Baustein zu den vielfältigen geplanten Veranstaltungen aus Anlass des Wagner-Jubiläumsjahres 2013 bei, indem wir mit Konzerten, Events und Ausstellungen, Vorträgen und anderem ein sehr umfangreiches Programm für alle Interessengruppen anbieten wollen. Dabei spielt die wissenschaftliche Auseinandersetzung naturgemäß eine wichtige Rolle und so will ich diese Vorlesungsreihe als Auftakt verstehen, gleichsam als akademische Festouvertüre, um hier in Bayreuth ausnahmsweise einmal Johannes Brahms zu zitieren. Ich wünsche der Ringvorlesung bestes Gelingen, viel Erfolg, eine stets reibungslos funktionierende Technik, allen Teilnehmern neue Perspektiven, Impulse und Einsichten und uns allen für unsere Stadt Bayreuth eine hochrangige Veranstaltung, die den Wissenschaftsstandort und den Kulturstandort Bayreuth eindrucksvoll bestärkt und bekräftigt. Und die Teilnahme von Präsident Bormann und von mir soll, glaube ich, auch einen Beitrag dazu leisten, dass wir diesen Pinball, der heute sozusagen in das Flipperspiel der Welt hinausgeschossen wird, mit einer etwas höheren Anfangsgeschwindigkeit versehen, damit es gescheit anstößt überall und damit auch intensive Reaktionen kommen und eine wertvolle Diskussion in Gang gesetzt wird. Herzlichen Dank Ihnen allen. Ich wünsche viel Vergnügen und eine ertragreiche Reihe.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Oberbürgermeister, sehr geehrter Universitätspräsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Studierende, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Es ist mir eine große Freude, eine große Ehre auch, heute bei diesem Anlass die Universität Bern und speziell das Institut für Musikwissenschaft als Partner des weltumspannenden Projekts WWW 2013 repräsentieren zu dürfen. Ich spreche dabei nicht nur in meinem Namen, sondern auch im Namen des Direktors des Instituts für Musikwissenschaft, Herrn Prof. Dr. Anselm Gerhardt, der herzliche Grüße übermitteln lässt, sowie im Namen meiner hier anwesenden Kollegin, Frau Privatdozentin Dr. Ivana Rentsch, die zwar am Musikwissenschaftlichen Institut der Universität Zürich tätig ist, aber für das Wagner-Projekt an ihre alte Wirkungsstätte, die Universität Bern, zurückkehrt, um zusammen mit Anselm Gerhardt und mir dort die Tagung im November 2012 als Teil von WWW 2013 zu organisieren. Dass die Veranstaltung WagnerWorldWide Europe gerade in der Hauptstadt der Schweiz stattfindet, der Hauptstadt eines Landes also, das ohne Zweifel in Europa liegt, aber nicht Mitglied der Europäischen Union ist und insofern einen nationalen Sonderstatus für sich reklamiert. Diese Tatsache entbehrt auf den ersten Blick ja nicht einer gewissen Ironie. Aber damit sind wir eigentlich schon direkt beim Thema. Denn unter Bezugnahme auf die übergeordnete Programmatik von WWW 2013, also auf die Frage nach den Gründen für Wagners geografisch scheinbar unbegrenzte Aktualität, haben wir uns entschieden, gerade das Problem des Nationalen und des Internationalen bei der Rezeption dieses Komponisten in den Blick zu nehmen. Vom 6. bis zum 10. November 2012 wird in Bern eine Tagung mit Vorträgen und Podiumsdiskussionen stattfinden, deren Motto lauten wird: Wagner und das Musiktheater zwischen Nationalismus und Globalisierung. Unser Konzept folgt dabei der doppelten Perspektive, wie sie durch die 5 Themenbereiche von WagnerWorldWide 2013 vorgegeben ist, einer doppelten Perspektive in dem Sinne, dass jedes der Themen ja mit 2 Begriffen bezeichnet ist, einem eher historischen und einem eher modernen, zeitgenössischen. Und so wollen wir auch in Bern bei unserer Tagung den Blick erstmal zurück ins 19. Jahrhundert lenken und nach der Kategorie des Nationalen in Wagners Œuvre fahnden, darüber hinaus aber auch nach der Rolle des Musiktheaters für die europäischen Nationalbewegungen insgesamt, von Skandinavien bis Italien, von Polen bis Spanien. Verbindungslinien ergeben sich dabei quasi von selbst, denn es gehört zu den bemerkenswertesten Phänomenen der europäischen Operngeschichte des 19. Jahrhunderts, dass die Suche nach einer Nationaloper in den verschiedenen Ländern gleichsam zwangsläufig in Auseinandersetzung mit Wagner erfolgt ist, sei es durch Anschluss, sei es durch Abstoßung. Vor dem Hintergrund dieses historischen Panoramas soll dann unsere Gegenwart in den Fokus gerückt werden, das Zeitalter eben der vielbeschworenen Globalisierung, des internationalisierten Sängermarktes, des Austauschs von Inszenierungen zwischen Opernhäusern auf dem ganzen Erdball. Eine Epoche, in der das Musiktheater, wie es scheint, keine wesentliche Rolle in nationalen Selbstfindungsprozessen mehr zu spielen hat. Ob das freilich so ist, wäre dann schon die erste Frage. Ein Blick nach Ungarn lehrt, dass dort ja im Moment gerade das Gegenteilige passiert, nämlich eine gezielte Nationalisierung des Theaters, bei der man sich manchmal tatsächlich auch an Wagner erinnert fühlen könnte. Etwa wenn, und das entnehme ich einem gerade erschienenen Zeitungsartikel der Neuen Zürcher Zeitung, etwa wenn der just berufene Intendant des neuen Theaters in Budapest proklamiert, im Geiste der ungarischen Nation und der, das ist ein Zitat, Prinzipien unseres Nationalstaates gegen den liberalen Unterhaltungsbetrieb anspielen zu wollen. Und der liberale Unterhaltungsbetrieb verkörpert in der Musikmetropole Paris, der war ja auch Wagner bekanntlich durchaus ein Dorn im Auge. Man kann das in die Kunst und die Revolution beispielsweise nachlesen. Kehrt hier also etwas wider, das man schon längst überwunden glaubte, das Nationale im Globalisierten? Oder, mein zweites und letztes Beispiel, wie sieht es damit aus, dass zum 150-jährigen Bestehen Italiens in Rom natürlich ganz selbstverständlich eine Festaufführung von Nabucco stattfindet, bei der dann, vielleicht haben Sie es im Fernsehen gesehen, Silvio Berlusconi vom Publikum aber ausgepfiffen wird, weil er ja gerade dabei ist, die Kultur in Italien kaputt zu sparen. Also sozusagen der legendäre Gefangenenchor in Nabucco als musikalisches Aufbegehren nicht gegen die Fremdherrschaft, sondern gegen den Cavaliere an der Spitze der eigenen Regierung, wenn man so will. Man sieht, ganz frei von nationalen Implikationen ist die Oper auch am Beginn des 21. Jahrhunderts nicht, während andererseits die Globalisierung natürlich ihre Spuren hinterlassen hat, sei es hinsichtlich der Aufführungspraxis oder vieler anderer Aspekte. Genug Stoff für Diskussionen, die von Bayreuth aus gleichsam in die USA, nach China, Burkina Faso und eben auch in die Schweiz abstrahlen. Wagner Worldwide. In diesem Sinne sehe ich unserem großen Projekt erwartungsfroh entgegen und würde mich freuen, viele von Ihnen im November 2012 dann auch in Bern begrüßen zu können. Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Okay, ich werde mich sehr kurz halten, weil ich dann für eine ganze Stunde sprechen werde. Herr Oberbürgermeister, Präsident Bormann, Dr. Mungen, Studenten, grüß Gott, wie man in der Schweiz sagt. Ich wollte nur sagen, dass ich über dieses Projekt vor einem Jahr gehört habe und ich war sofort begeistert, endlich mal Themen zu sehen, die versuchen, die Frage Wagner ein bisschen zu ändern und in die Zukunft irgendwie zu richten. Und sehr schnell ist eine enge und intensive Kooperation und Zusammenarbeit mit Herrn Mungen entstanden, und das mit den Folgen, was man sich nur als Akademiker wünschen könnte. interdisziplinär und transatlantisch. Und es ist für mich eine große Ehre, hier als Einführungsvortrag eingeladen worden zu sein. Und ich wollte mich bedanken. Und ja, ich wünsche uns allen viel Erfolg bei diesem Projekt. Ich werde in South Carolina Januar 2013 eine Konferenz organisieren, was nicht mit einem spezifischen Thema sich befassen wird, sondern versuchen wird, mit allen 5 Themenfeldern sich auseinanderzusetzen. Und vielleicht sollten wir, Anno, so bald mit dem Vortrag anfangen. Ja?
Ja, ich habe mich gerade nochmal bedankt bei Herrn Präsident Bormann und Oberbürgermeister Hohl. Herzlichen Dank und vielleicht schaffen Sie es ja mal bei uns reinzuschauen. Das geht jetzt auch eben nicht nur über den Hörsaal, sondern über das Podcast oder den Livestream. Das ist toll, genau. Das ist eine wirkliche Alternative.
Die Frage ist, Tatort oder YouTube? Ja?
Sind wir eigentlich schon über Facebook befreundet? Das wäre die nächste Frage. Ja. So I think now we should switch to English. Welcome to the classroom also in South Carolina and Columbia. Hello everybody. We're just starting our lecture series now. We had a couple of introductory speeches because this is kind of the kickoff for the whole project. So the mayor of the city of Bayreuth were here and the president of the university. And we also have like our guests from Bern, which is another partner of this project. I would like to introduce now Nicholas Vazsonyi, who's going to do the first lecture. He is a professor of German and comparative literature at the University of South Carolina, as we know, in Columbia, and like recently he was also named, would you call it that way, I don't know, the Jesse Chapman Alcon Memorial Professor of Foreign Languages, which I think is a very honorable thing. Congratulations. He got a BA from Indiana University in 1982, an MA from the University of California, and that's also the alma mater where he did his PhD in 1993. And this PhD this dissertation was published in 1997, and that's one of his first areas of academic interest. The title of that book is Lukács reads Goethe, From Aestheticism to Stalinism, Columbia, 1992. Another, which is related actually to this, another focus of his work is German identity formation in the 18th and 19th century, and that of course where also his very big interest of Wagner comes into play, and there we see his really very interesting book on Wagner's marketing strategies, and he's going to talk about that very soon, which is really an amazing, I think, chapter in the reception history of Wagner, where we really do get a kind of a different idea on this phenomenon and on this person, and it's been broadly reviewed and gets a lot of attention, I think, and that's what it deserves. And now, Nicholas, I would like you to start with your presentation, and this will be about 1 hour, and then we have the discussion with you here and with you guys over there. So get your pencils ready and write down your questions, and here we go.
Thank you very much, Anno, for the introduction. Ich wollte auch kurz auf Deutsch sagen, wenn Sie auf Deutsch Fragen oder Kommentare haben, bitte ruhig auf Deutsch sprechen und ich kann übersetzen oder Anno kann übersetzen. Ja? Also Sprache soll kein Hindernis sein. Ja? Okay, I wanted to start with a little anecdote from about 10 days ago when the iPhone 4S was launched. There was a report in the American news about the launch, and I think over 1 million phones were sold on the first day, and they were projecting the sales of 4 million phones over the first weekend. And they did a report on a man who had traveled from Amsterdam to California to be at an Apple store in California where he was going to buy his Apple phone. And I thought this was very interesting. I'm not trying to compare the iPhone 4S to Götter Dämmerung or anything, but it's the phenomenon of there being a global event, but that someone feels that they need to be in one specific place is something I think that has a lot to do with what Wagner maybe intuitively understood, which is that as we become more globalized, we still have a desire or a need to be attached to some specific location. And that's, of course, the function that Bayreuth fulfilled already in the 19th century and continues to fulfill in the 21st century. Something maybe to keep in mind. As you can see, my topic today is the global marketing of Wagner. And maybe the first question you might ask yourself when you see the title is, why is this topic worthy of separate attention? After all, products and personalities today are marketed globally as a matter of routine, from toothpaste to cars, to Shakespeare, Beethoven, and Britney Spears. The brief answer is that the case of Wagner is different and special for two reasons. First, Wagner was one of a new generation of composers who were actively concerned with their own marketing, and, in his case, a marketing that was truly global from the start, and not just limited to a confined geographic radius. There were already composers in the 18th century who were concerned with their own marketing. Handel and Telemann are often examples, but their marketing strategies were much more locally based. Of course, the world hadn't proceeded to the kind of interconnections and transportation possibilities and media connections that already the 19th century provided. Second, and in contradiction to my first point, Wagner was at the same time committed to the notion of the genuine artwork that would exist for its own sake and not in order to satisfy any market considerations. In other words, an artwork that had no need for marketing. So on the one hand, he was concerned with marketing, and on the other hand, he denied that that was the case. This ended up, and in a sense continues to be, what sets the Wagner industry apart. It is a global marketing effort that simultaneously denies or tries to deny that it is one. This contradiction accounts in part for the fact that, although so much has been written about Wagner, there has been so little work done on Wagner and the marketplace. Nevertheless, the global marketing of Wagner is a vast topic and one which is only now beginning to be discussed, even though it has been going on since about 1850. When the composer was not yet 40 years old and had not yet completed those stage works that would permanently make his mark on the international cultural landscape. Because it is so vast a topic, and because I'm only just now in the process of figuring it out myself, I can really only just sketch out some of the issues today, and maybe suggest some avenues for further consideration and research. It is well known that Wagner loved to talk and write. And the subject he loved to talk and write about more than anything else was Richard Wagner. People in his own time already made fun of this quality, and some got really angry about it. All kinds of words have been used to describe his bad habit, including Selbstdarstellungsvermögen, so self-profiling, Selbstinszenierung, staging yourself essentially, Regisseur seiner selbst, making a production of himself. After having a dinner with him, the composer Robert Schumann wrote to a friend that Wagner was a nice enough fellow, but the trouble was he never stopped talking. The French author Catulle Mendes, one of Wagner's early devotees, described his first meeting with Wagner with the words, "Il parlait, parlait, parlait." He talked and talked and talked. It could well be that this was just a personal idiosyncrasy, and many have portrayed it as such. But the historical timing of his behavior couldn't have been better. One consequence was that Wagner became the architect of his own fame. I'm not suggesting that Wagner is famous only because he liked to talk about himself. But what I am suggesting is that because he liked to talk and write about himself, he had a hand in controlling his message and the way the world would come to think and talk about him. Not only that, he produced such an overwhelming quantity of written materials that he saturated the media with his presence. He wrote autobiographies, essays, short stories, theoretical treatises, not to mention thousands of letters, tens of thousands of letters. Wagner clearly had an uncanny intuition about the emerging media and the mechanics of engineering a global reputation. In this sense, he embodies modernity, not just his own times, but also in the sense that he seems to have understood the directions in which modern culture would develop. We already get a taste of this in Friedrich Nietzsche's unbelievably perceptive critique of Wagner. Observations like, Wagner sums up modernity. Wagner resümiert die Modernität. That's in his introduction. He just makes this statement and then spends the rest of Der Fall Wagner trying to explain what he means. So I have a few quotes here which I won't be able to discuss in a lot of detail, but I just want to kind of throw them out there. Is Wagner a human being at all? Isn't he rather a sickness? He has made music sick. Nothing is more modern than this total sickness. Ist Wagner überhaupt ein Mensch? Ist nicht eher eine Krankheit? Hat die Musik krank gemacht, weil nichts moderner ist als diese Gesamterkrankung. What does Nietzsche mean when he talks about music as sick or Wagner as sick? It's this idea, I think, that music and art in general has become unbalanced and self-indulgent. And when the artist is self-indulgent, and the self-indulgent art the artist produces makes the audience itself self-indulgent. And if you indulge yourself, you become psychologically unbalanced. So it's a psychological sickness that is the plague of modernity. And this is really at the core of Nietzsche's critique. Wagner is the modern artist par excellence. So he's saying really that what Wagner embodies a phenomenon that is not just about Wagner, but Wagner is really the pinnacle of a trend that Nietzsche is trying to fight against. Wagner's success, his success with nerves and consequently women, I'm not going to go there, has turned the whole world of ambitious musicians into disciples of his secret art. Only sick music makes money today. Our big theaters live off Wagner. So there again, we have here Nietzsche now making the connection between the sick art and making money, which is really coming to the heart of what it is that I want to talk about. So what Wagner is also uncannily aware of what it is that makes money, and at the heart of it, it's really just a business plan, which leads me to the next one. Whoops, went the wrong way. The emergence of the actor in music, in a formula Wagner and Liszt. They signify the same thing. In declining cultures, because that's what it's about, right? Whenever the decision comes to rest with the masses, authenticity becomes superfluous, a liability. Only the actor still arouses great enthusiasm. So it's no longer, in a sense, that the artist is self-indulgent. What Nietzsche is really saying is that Wagner is calculating. The audience is self-indulgent as it consumes the artwork, but the artist himself is simply manipulating the audience. So that's actually, in a sense, a greater criticism of Wagner than accusing him of being self-indulgent. Great success with the masses no longer sides with those who are authentic, i.e., in order to be, and this goes together with the idea of Wagner and Liszt being actors, there's nothing genuine there, which is in a sense the greatest criticism you can lodge against an artist. So this really, Nietzsche's critique of Wagner, which we could spend probably the rest of the hour talking about, really launched a whole series of reactions to Wagner that continue to this day. Until recently, the discussion of Wagner, modernity, and mass culture rested on restatements and explications of Nietzsche's aphoristic and often cryptic exclamations. There is a long succession of important Wagner exegesis launched by Nietzsche: Thomas Mann, Theodor Adorno, Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, and just last year, Alain Badiou's stimulating 5 lessons on Wagner. Adorno's Versuch über Wagner, In Search of Wagner, is a detailed encounter with the composer which would exceed even today's lecture to adequately address. But perhaps his main contention is that Wagner is the first composer who, quote, creates commodities that satisfy the needs of the culture market, close quote. Sie befriedigen aber zugleich als Waren Bedürfnisse des Kulturmarkts. I don't have that up there. In other words, there's a direct line leading from Wagner to what Adorno termed the culture industry and Hollywood. One of his most memorable lines concerns the leitmotif, which I have up there in German, a rather long German sentence, which is translated as, among the functions of the leitmotif can be found, alongside the aesthetic one, a commodity function, rather like that of an advertisement. Anticipating the universal practice of mass culture later on, the music is designed to be remembered. It is intended for the forgetful. This is, of course, the greatest insult you can throw at the idea of the leitmotif, and Adorno is being, I think, provocative and ultimately unfair, because this is not at all what Wagner does with the leitmotif, but somewhere at the core of the leitmotif, the notion of the soundbite is there, and of course the soundbite is at the core of advertising, political campaigns, really anything people want you to remember nowadays is attached to some kind of either a visual logo or a musical logo. And so I think Adorno is certainly onto something that would bear further discussion. This idea is again taken up by Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, a Frenchie, in his series of essays called Musica Ficta, Figures of Wagner, which starts out by saying, this is his opening proposition, quote, Wagner founded the first mass art, close quote, a claim that Alain Badiou, just published, seizes upon and in turn uses as his own launching point. Somewhat provocatively, Badiou writes that it is, quote, in the wake of Wagner that David Bowie, rap, and so forth have arrived on the scene. I think what Badiou is talking about, what Badiou means, is that it is, on the one hand, supposed to reach a large segment of the population, but on the other hand, it is nevertheless politically revolutionary. I think that's why he includes rap and David Bowie, because they're supposed to have some kind of a political agitation, but at the same time reach a large audience. Okay. Starting with Nietzsche, these are all stunning and bold claims, but I would submit that although these observations about Wagner certainly do have something to penetrate about his relationship to the historical, cultural, and social phenomenon we call modernity and mass culture, they also miss the mark in two important ways. First, Wagner is actually not a mass success, and he never was one. Just ask a normal 18-year-old from Germany, not to mention anywhere else for that matter, what comes to their mind when they hear the name Richard Wagner or Bayreuth? Not much or nothing at all, I suggest, accompanied by a shrug of the shoulder, will be the typical answer. Claims about Wagner's mass success are never accompanied by sales figures or numbers of scores sold, numbers of recordings purchased, quantity of opera tickets bought. So the claim that Wagner was a mass success is simply the expression of an idea about what has become mass entertainment and the mechanics of mass media. Certainly, Wagner may present a conceptual prototype in some respects, although this is itself a hard thesis to maintain. But whatever he did and whatever he has become, this still bears no relationship to a contemporary understanding of what constitutes a popular success on a global scale. Secondly, Nietzsche's, and by extensions Adorno's, Lacoue-Labarthe's, and Badiou's comments about Wagner's modernity and contributions to a culture industry refer in the first place to his aesthetics, i.e. the notion of art as manipulation. None of these gentlemen are talking about how Wagner engaged in public relations or made himself the subject of public debates, but rather how Wagner, the magician, was able to seduce, hypnotize, and take hold of his audiences, a situation that a half-century later becomes even more significant given the appropriation of Wagner by the National Socialist regime in Germany as a central pillar of its propaganda effort. It is a critique that ultimately suggests that Wagner's art is not genuine, but rather calculated to reap success and its rewards, much as the popular hits or Hollywood movie industry today. This certainly is an aspect of the artwork in modernity, of which Wagner is an exemplar, and even more of popular art in modernity, which Wagner would deny he had anything to do with. even if he did compose the Ride of the Valkyries, the Walkürenritt, and was the first to perform it as a separate piece, despite his own conviction that the Ring of the Nibelungen was only to be performed as a complete cycle and only under very specific and special circumstances. But Wagner's performance of excerpts designed to appeal to the concert-going public and intended to raise awareness and interest in his works, specifically the much-anticipated performance of the complete Ring cycle in Bayreuth, which has been called the most anticipated musical event of the 19th century, does begin to address the marketing dimension of the Wagner phenomenon beyond the purely aesthetic. The first Bayreuth Festival of 1876 was also a truly global event, followed, attended, and discussed by people from and in several continents. But the festival, which essentially launched the Wagner industry as we understand it today, also represented an end point of sorts. The culmination of activities started by Wagner himself around 1840, and increasingly supported by a group of enthusiasts both financially, which is what we usually hear about, and in terms of publicity. Nietzsche actually comes close to recognizing this aspect of the Wagner machine when he wrote, "Nicht jede Musik hat bisher Literatur nötig gehabt." So, not every kind of music needed a whole battery of commentary attached to it. But Nietzsche is careful. He's not saying that no one ever wrote about their artwork before. With its beginnings in the 18th century, the aesthetic treatise that anticipates and explicates the artwork had already been an established practice by the early 19th century. Though it is true, the project Wagner embarks upon during his first stay in Paris between 1839 and 1842, and then continued for the remainder of his life, is unprecedented. This is essentially what I discuss in my book. Not only a more careful look at the many ways in which Wagner promoted himself, his ideas and his works, but the way in which he essentially made himself into a brand. The Wagner brand has, of course, an aesthetic component. His works have a distinct content, look, and sound, and are all quite different from anything else on offer in the operatic supermarket. But Wagner, the public personality, also had a distinctive look and a distinctive outlook, what the Germans call Weltanschauung. This included opinions on history, culture, and politics. All of this, the person as well as the ideology, became attached to the music dramas and vice versa. To borrow a term, the Wagner brand is a Gesamtkunstwerk of sorts. But Wagner was not alone in his marketing and branding efforts, and it is with the help he got early on that I would like to begin today. Around 1850, when Wagner found himself in Zurich, fleeing the warrant for his arrest in Germany after the unsuccessful uprising in Dresden in May 1849, in which he had participated, Wagner found himself at a creative and existential impasse. His solution was to write his way out of it, and so he produced a series of theoretical works like Art and Revolution, Artwork of the Future, culminating with opera and drama. At the same time, Franz Brendel, editor of the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, a relatively new journal based in Leipzig that aspired to be at the cutting edge of musical culture, decided that focusing on Wagner might be a useful way for him to steer his journal in the direction he wanted to take it. So in a series of New Year's editorials between 1851 and 1853, Brendel became ever more blatant about the direction he was pursuing. So diese Blätter haben fortan die Aufgabe, die Umgestaltung, welche der Kunst bevorsteht, nach allen Seiten hin entschieden zu vertreten. That's his New Year's greeting from 1852, in which he says that the direction that the journal wants to take will be decisively represented. And then the following year, he announces, without any attempt at hiding his agenda, he announces Die Parteinahme für Wagner. So he's going to take on the Wagner line, so to speak. He will be, they will be engaged in promoting Wagner. Already in 1849, Brendel commissioned Theodor Ulich, a Dresden violinist with a talent for writing about music, and who also had known Wagner in Dresden, to start a series of articles about Wagner and related topics for publication in his journal. What started in late 1849 and ended only because of Ulich's untimely death in 1853 was an unprecedented series of articles, the likes of which had never before been written about any composer, let alone one who was alive and one who had not even written his mature works yet. In fact, it may not have ever happened since then. I would be interested to know if any composer has been promoted the same way that Ulich promoted Wagner. At the height of the publicity campaign, there was not a single month when the Neue Zeitschrift did not publish some article about Wagner. Yet, it was often quite subtle. For instance, Ulich wrote a series of essays about the centrality of dance in Beethoven's symphonies. Wagner's name is never mentioned, except that Ulich is fleshing out Wagner's own theories of the symphony, and in particular Beethoven's, that Wagner himself was publishing simultaneously in his own book, Artwork of the Future. Similarly, in 1850, Ulich wrote a long series of articles that set out to destroy Meyerbeer's latest operatic hit, Le Prophète, and to destroy Meyerbeer in the process. Only at the end of the last in the whole series of essays does Ulich mention a sublime alternative, which he describes in glowing and loving detail. Wagner's name is never mentioned, but it becomes clear after a while that Ulich is talking about nothing other than Wagner's opera Tannhäuser. After that series of articles where Meyerbeer is subject to sustained ridicule, which included blatant anti-Semitic attacks, Ulich began a new series of articles that extol Wagner's latest work, Lohengrin, that had just been premiered in Weimar on the 28th of August, 1850, Goethe's birthday. Wagner's latest work, this series of articles is not just a review, even though it's called a Rezension, but actually a detailed analysis of the work. And on it goes. At one point, Wagner even thematizes what Ulich was doing and uses a revealing formulation to make his point. Was machst du für ein heilloses Aufhebens von mir? Wenn du ein Jude wärest, sollte man glauben, du hättest Prozente davon. What sort of unholy promotion of me are you undertaking? If you are a Jew, one would think you are getting a percentage. This is in a letter. Wagner was obviously trying to be funny, but his comments to Ulich are revealing because they touch on all the issues surrounding the promotion and marketing of high art that has made discussing Wagner and the marketing dimension of his work so difficult. Promotion is unholy because the artwork has become a religious artifact, hence the term Kunstreligion. In any case, only Jews engage in promotion, first in return for money, suggesting that they're not genuinely committed to the thing being promoted, and secondly, because promoting something is not actually useful. Nothing new is created, and it doesn't provide anything that is necessary. So not unlike the banking industry, engaging in promotion is a way of earning a living off someone else's work, much as a parasite lives off an organism, hence the stereotypical comment about parasitic Jews. But Wagner was definitely torn, because Ulich's promotion also made him very happy, despite the negative connotations associated with the activity. At one point, he even wrote to Ulich, "Write as much as you can about me so that the music journals are filled and I'll at least be really famous. Schreibt nur wenigstens recht viel über mich, dass die musikalischen Zeitungen recht voll und ich wenigstens recht berühmt werde." The result of all this provocative noise in the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik was that it attracted the attention of writers and editors who worked for other journals and who, of course, could not let the provocations stand unanswered. And so with every attack or outrageous pronouncement coming from the Neue Zeitschrift, there was a counterattack from one or more of the other journals, until in a very short space of time, all of Europe was abuzz with the name Wagner, leading one exasperated critic to say, "Wagner und immer Wagner." Wagner, it's only Wagner. Whatever one thinks of Wagner, one has to admit, and here's the quote, "dass sich das musikalische Interesse zunächst ihn gruppiert, dass jede allgemeinere Frage in Zusammenhang mit den von ihnen angeregten gebracht werden, wie umgekehrt jede Erörterung über ihn auf die allgemeinen Voraussetzungen der Kunst zurückführen muss. Er ist also nicht zu umgehen. So there's no way of getting around Wagner because every discussion that has to do with music either leads to Wagner and every discussion about Wagner results in a broader discussion about other musical issues. At the end of this same decade, in 1860, 1861, Wagner once again found himself in Paris, first for a landmark concert, or series of concerts, in which he conducted overtures and excerpts from Tannhäuser, Lohengrin, and a not yet premiered Tristan und Isolde, followed by the riotous performance of Tannhäuser, freshly revised for the Paris Opera. We know that a virtual who's who of the Parisian cultural elite attended the concerts, including the composers Berlioz, Gounod, Meyerbeer, Rossini, Saint-Saëns, the artists Fantin-Latour, Gustave Doré, and the authors Baudelaire and Champfleury. From a marketing and branding perspective, these two events could not have been more successful. The concert was an epiphany for the French modernist poet Charles Baudelaire, who wrote Wagner a moving letter followed by an impassioned essay directed at the French public. This essay launched the movement in France that came to be known as Wagnerism, which dominated French avant-garde circles into the early 20th century. At the same time, the scandal associated with Tannhäuser proved a publicity coup that put Wagner on the mainstream cultural map for good. Indeed, one could say that by 1861, the Wagner phenomenon had become international. Simultaneously, Franz Liszt, the leading musical figure of the mid-19th century and Wagner's patron saint, contributed his own considerable resources and talents to spreading the Wagner brand. He conducted the premiere of Lohengrin in 1850, at a time when Wagner was a wanted fugitive in Germany, and he also wrote a substantial and ultimately book-length essay on Tannhäuser and Lohengrin that in many respects sets the tone for the music aesthetic Wagner discourse for the rest of the century. From a marketing, dare I say, global marketing perspective, perhaps his greatest contribution to the Wagner cause was the composition of piano transcriptions and paraphrases of selected excerpts from Wagner operas. This started also in 1849 with excerpts from Tannhäuser, and ultimately there were 15 of them. These were followed in short order by additional transcriptions, arrangements, and reductions of Wagner's works, all destined for the private home market and increasingly for the amateur musician. By all accounts, this was a lucrative business and had the additional benefit of making musical works otherwise only accessible through live performance, which was both infrequent and expensive to produce and attend, readily available for a much wider range of people than would have been able to attend either live performances of full works or concert performances of excerpts. Matthew Blackmar, who is an MA student at California State University in Long Beach, refers to this process as canonization via domestication. Blackmar has been doing some very interesting research in this area and has kindly shared some of his findings with me. And by the way, I just wanted to say one of the aspects of this project that excites me the most is that we really want to include the next generation of scholars as much as possible. And the thing that I find so interesting about these 5 topic areas is that they really address issues that speak to our lives today. And so the question, to what extent is Wagner relevant to us today, I think really lies at the core of this whole project. Blackmar has found that there were what he calls 2 waves of Wagner transcription, addressing 2 very different kinds of audience. The earliest were the efforts of an exclusive group of Wagner disciples and were produced with the composer's consent for an audience of musical progressives, i.e. an elite. These arrangements inspired a second wave of presumably unauthorized publications to reach a broader cross-section of the musical public. As Blackmar points out, the efforts of the earliest arrangers of, for instance, Wagner's Ring were in no small part inspired by their own domestic reception of the composer's music. For example, Karl Klindworth, who published piano vocal scores of Rheingold and Walküre, recounted first discovering Wagner through a piano vocal score of Rienzi, obtained at age 15. And Karl Tausig, whom I'll come back to in a few minutes, conducted excerpts from Die Walküre at Wagner's Christmas 1862 Vienna concerts, and soon thereafter obtained Wagner's permission to arrange two of the excerpts he had conducted in Vienna for solo piano, the Walkürenritt and Siegmund's Liebesgang from Walküre. Blackmar has also done an analysis of the vast collection of sheet music publications advertised within the Hofmeister Monatsberichten, a serial catalogue of new music available for purchase in the German-speaking world from 1829 to 1945, as it offers a macroscopic view of the first 50 years of print dissemination of Wagner's music. And I just wanted to share one of his charts with you so you can get an idea of the numbers. As you can see, this is the number of different editions of arrangements of Wagner's music per opera. And as you can see, by far the most popular, in the 19th century at least, is Tannhäuser, by a wide margin, followed then by Lohengrin. It's very interesting to see. So just to recap, if we characterize the 1850s as the decade when Wagner articulated in writing the specifics of what would become his brand, and the decade when musical discourse, at least in Germany, became saturated with the discussion about Wagner, then in the 1860s, it's the decade when Wagnerism begins to spread into other countries. By the way, Wagnerianer as a term first appears in the press in the year 1847. It's very interesting. At that point, Lohengrin hadn't even been performed yet. Wagner was still in Dresden. So the 1860s is the decade when Wagnerism begins to spread into other countries, in the first place, France. This is accompanied in the 1860s by an explosion of sheet music sales and the entry of Wagner into the domestic sphere. Even if there are many aspects to these developments that set Wagner apart from other successful and outstanding composers, the real arrival of Wagner onto the global scene takes place during the 1870s, the same decade that saw the launch of the Bayreuth Festival with the world premiere of the completed Ring Cycle in 1876. The first performance of a Wagner opera in Italy was the triumphal premiere of Lohengrin at Bologna's Teatro Comunale on the 1st of November 1871. And Wagner soon became a foil for a deeply divided Italian discourse about the future direction of music. Although he had been in London twice before, once in 1855 for an extended stay, Wagner really only made a lasting impression with the series of concerts he put on in 1877, partly in an effort to recover from the financial losses of the 1876 festival. But the really significant development of the 1870s, with the most enduring global impact, had to do with the financing of the Festspielhaus, construction, and the running of the first festival. The costs for this unprecedented and entirely modern undertaking were estimated at 300,000 thaler, which is about 9 million euros today. However, the funding sources which we take for granted today were not yet in place, specifically corporate sponsorship, state subsidies for the arts, and endowments for projects in the humanities. One idea proposed by the German Jewish pianist and Wagner devotee Karl Tausig, and by Cosima's friend, the wealthy socialite Marie von Schleinitz, was to form a patrons association, Patronatverein. Patrons would purchase a total of 1,000 certificates, Patronatscheine, each costing 300 thaler, to raise the necessary 300,000. In return, the owner of each Patronatschein would be guaranteed a seat for all 3 of the ring cycles planned for the first festival. Thus, there was the possibility that 3 individuals could share the cost of a single certificate, allowing each of them to attend one completed cycle. Wagner loved the idea and sent out 2 circulars dated 12th and 18th of May 1871. In the first, Wagner optimistically announced the forthcoming festival for the summer of 1873, proclaimed Bayreuth as the location, and declared the formation of a Society of Friends, Verein von Freunden, called the Patrons of the Stage Festival in Bayreuth, Patronen des Bühnenfestspieles in Bayreuth. The second flyer explains the financial details for the patron certificate scheme. On the 15th of May, so between the 2 circulars, Emil Heckel, a Mannheim piano manufacturer, responded to the plan in a letter to Wagner, at least to the first part of the plan. Ultimately, he was concerned that those with modest financial resources would be unable to participate in the venture and thus have no chance to experience the festival. So he subsequently proposed the formation of societies, Vereine. The membership dues would be used to purchase the certificates, which would then be the property of the Wagner Society. Members would then draw lots to decide who would get a ticket to go to the festival. On the 1st of June, 1871, it's amazingly fast if you think about it. So a half month later, Heckel and a group of fellow enthusiasts in Mannheim founded the first Wagner Society, officially called a Society in Support of the Great National Undertaking, Verein zur Förderung des großen nationalen Unternehmens. And it's interesting also that in the 1870s, right after the Franco-Prussian War, the national dimension of Wagner's undertaking was really so clearly expressed. Membership was restricted to friends and supporters of Wagner's artistic endeavors who committed to pay an annual contribution for the years 1871, 1872, and 1873. The Mannheim Statutes set the standard for all future Wagner societies. On 16th of July, Cosima wrote to Heckel, encouraging him to, quote, get in touch with various cities and spread the Wagner Society throughout Germany. So she was very much involved with the original spread of the Wagner Society idea. Within 5 months of the Mannheim founding, Wagner societies were formed in Munich, Leipzig, and Vienna. And the following year, 1872, saw explosive growth. Dresden, Bayreuth, 2 in Berlin, Weimar, Nürnberg, Mainz, Göttingen, Köln, an Akademische Richard Wagner Gesellschaft in Berlin. And in the same year, Wagner societies were formed outside of the German-speaking world in Pest. Budapest was formed in 1873, so in 1872 it was still just Pest, London, and New York. By the 1876 opening of the Bayreuth Festival, there were additional Wagner societies in Prague, Basel, Zurich, Riga, Paris, Florence, Milan, Boston, Cairo, Warsaw, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and Copenhagen. Wagner's project had become an artistic event with a global reach and significance. In terms of the actual goal, and despite the exponential growth of the Wagner Society network, the effort to raise the necessary 300,000 thaler failed. After 1.5 years, only 340 certificates of the 1,000 were sold. Wagner ultimately had to rely on good old King Ludwig II to finance the completion of the theater. So he saved the day again. After 1876, the Wagner Society structure and network went through several transformations, stages, and rebirths. So even if the short-term goal was not reached, and this is what one always reads in these books about Wagner, is that it was a failure, the fundraising was a failure. I think these people missed the point, because the roots were founded for what became long-term an unbelievably successful operation. So even if in the short term the goal was not reached, long term the existence and function of the Wagner societies has been not only an enormous success, but in a sense has guaranteed the existence of the Wagner industry as it developed into the 20th and 21st centuries. Society membership has meant that there was an identifiable core consumer base for Wagner that can always be counted upon. This consumer base could be efficiently tracked and reached long before there were companies dedicated to this objective. not to mention today's electronic web-based means of tracking consumers. So this was already in place in the 19th century in terms of Wagner. The goals of the societies have also remained consistent since their inception. Short-term, as the Mannheim Society statutes declared, the Wagner project was to be recognized as one of national significance, and members declared their personal commitment to Wagner's art and to the realization of the Ring in Bayreuth. After 1876, later Wagner societies added wording to their charters to underscore the expansionist, proselytizing, and even ideological mission that became synonymous with Wagnerism. The Darmstadt branch, for instance, wanted to unite friends of progress in the area of music drama, and they circulated an Aufruf, an appeal, which began, Die Werke Wagners erobern Europa. Im fernen, verwandten Weltteile hat sich sein Kunststreben Anerkennung verschafft. Es gibt keine Stadt von Bedeutung in der zivilisierten Welt, in der nicht Wagners Freunde wirken, und immer größer wird die Zahl seiner Anhänger. So, Wagner's works are conquering Europe. His artistic direction has been recognized in distant corners of the world. There is no significant city in the civilized world in which Wagner's friends are not active. The number of his supporters grows ever larger. So this is little old Darmstadt's, part of their contribution to the globalizing effort of Wagner, just to make that statement. The Dresden chapter's appeal refers to Wagner as, quote, the greatest living musical dramatist of our people. And the student-based Academic Wagner Society of Berlin, which differentiated itself from regular Wagner societies, which only appealed to the wealthier friends of Wagner's art, was formed, quote, to give the entire nation intellectual and practical access to Wagner. Their charter and its accompanying rationale aggressively call for lively agitation, lebhafte Agitation. Wagner is linked to the nationalist movement and refers to the triumph of the world historical calling of the Germanic peoples in its political sphere, meaning the recent victory over France and the unification of Germany. So this is still all the 1870s. The spiritual victory shall be celebrated through the German festivals in Bayreuth. Wagner is the bard of German greatness, der Sänger deutscher Größe. And it continues, der große Dichter-Komponist, dessen unbeirrtes reformatorisches Wirken auf dem Gebiete der Kunst mit Bismarcks politischer Tätigkeit verglichen werden kann, weihte das Werk seines Lebens dem Vaterlande. So the great poet-composer whose unfailing reformatory impact in the art world can only be compared to Bismarck's political activities, has dedicated his life's work to the fatherland. So it's very interesting in all of these declarations that you have both the national and the global, in a sense, simultaneously being discussed. Membership in the academic Wagner Society was free, i.e. they were not in the business of purchasing certificates, but members had to pledge, quote, that they would be advocates in all circles for Richard Wagner's artistic direction, close quote. Their mission, to mobilize, quote, the entire Volk to energetically support the national festival. And in paragraph 1 of the Academic Society statutes, they talk about, quote, their basic mission to foster and propagate knowledge and respect for Wagner's reformatory ideas and achievements in music and drama through discussions and lectures, which is really at the core of what most Wagner societies engage in still today. They host lectures, the Wagner societies today host lectures, private concerts, other events to educate members about Wagner, his project, and enable a deeper understanding of his dramatic works. While all this can be, and traditionally has been, understood in ideological terms, I think it is just as helpful, and perhaps more useful, to think of these activities in terms of marketing, as a means of establishing, expanding, and securing a dominant market position for Wagner and his works. That, in turn, gives those who have supported this effort the satisfaction of knowing that the product they are enjoying is globally recognized for its excellence. So there's a reciprocal relationship between promoting something, having it be then accepted, and realizing that what you are enjoying is also understood and appreciated by others. This may be something we should discuss further. Wagner's response to all of this is also quite interesting. While pleased with the existence of the societies, Wagner maintained a certain distance, and he seemed uncomfortable that they were called Wagner societies. Strange. Although he was never one to shy away from ideology, I wonder whether he too was aware of the publicity and marketing dimension of the undertaking, and that's what would have made him uncomfortable. On the other hand, in his Mitteilung an die deutschen Wagnervereine, Communication to the German Wagner Societies, published on Christmas Day 1871, Wagner proposed a centrally organized Allgemeiner Deutscher Wagnerverein, so a general German Wagner Society, that would consolidate the individual societies, because he realized, quote, only with a large general association can the enterprise be permanently and successfully secured, close quote. By early 1872, Wagner had moved the central administration from Mannheim to Bayreuth, and so from very early on, there developed a global network controlled or at least directed by a central hub. In many respects, this basic design has not changed to this day. The fiscal failure of the first festival in 1876 prompted a lengthy appeal on the 1st of January 1877, in which Wagner suggested a two-pronged approach to maintaining the Bayreuth idea in the long term. He called for a large state subsidy and also hoped that additional funds would be raised through a newly formed patrons association. Wagner was widely ridiculed in the press for seeking state support, but he had just conceived of a type of public-private sponsorship that yet again was ahead of its time. At the meeting of the delegates on the 2nd of April 1877, the General Patrons Association for the Maintenance and Preservation of the Stage Festivals in Bayreuth, Allgemeiner Patronatverein zur Pflege der Erhaltung und Erhaltung der Bühnenfestspiele zu Bayreuth, was formed and assumed some significant goals outlined in its charter. To maintain and preserve permanently the Bayreuth Festival according to Wagner's intentions, to secure the funding for the annual recurrence of the Bayreuth Festival, and to better spread better understanding of Wagner's artwork in general and specifically the Nibelung tetralogy. So again, the same kind of missionary objectives. The statutes of the new centralized society combined the original focus on funding with the educational and propagandist mission of the Wagner societies. Wagner gave a speech on this occasion saying, quote, I always thought that the Wagner Society would be charged with promoting my direction. I consider this to be its most important function, close quote. 1 month after Wagner's death in February 1883, the Wagner Society in Munich released a circular, quote, to the representatives of the former Bayreuth Patrons Association, close quote, with the idea of restructuring the former Patronatverein and consolidating the Richard Wagner societies into a general Richard Wagner Society, Allgemeiner Richard Wagner Verein. This suggestion was implemented, and so all the Wagner societies globally fell under the leadership of the Central Association. I have found it very difficult to trace the story of the individual Wagner societies after this point. Some, like the Wagner societies in London and Munich, are well documented. They tell a story of periods of inactivity and re-establishment that very often mirror historical events, like, for instance, World War I. The Wagner Society in London went out of business during World War I. I wonder why. One particular story that is quite fascinating is that of the Richard Wagner Verband Deutscher Frauen, the Richard Wagner Association of German Women, founded in 1909 in Leipzig with the goal of raising 1 million marks for the festival bursary fund, the Stipendienstiftung. By 1913, this was achieved, but after World War I and the devastating inflation of 1923, fundraising had to begin anew. Again, after World War II, the Richard Wagner Verband had to be refounded in 1947, and the suffix German women was dropped in 1949. Meanwhile, Richard Wagner associations were being re-established after World War II, both inside and outside of Germany, and many of them looked to the Richard Wagner Verband as their umbrella organization even though the non-German societies had no voting rights to begin with. The internationalization of the German Association was achieved in 1991 with the declaration in Lyon of the International Association of Richard Wagner Societies, the Richard Wagner Verband International. And with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989-1990, the founding of Richard Wagner Verband associations in the former East quickly followed. Moscow, Budapest, cities in former East Germany, followed by St. Petersburg, renamed, and the Baltic states, Sofia, Zagreb. And more recently, associations have been formed in the Far East, Singapore, Taiwan, Bangkok, Perth, Africa, the Middle East, Marrakesh, Abu Dhabi, and in 2010, just a year ago, a Wagner Society in Jerusalem. Currently, there are over 130, I think there are 139 societies spread over every continent except Antarctica, with a total membership of over 24,000. The largest single Wagner society is in Würzburg. Maybe someone can explain that to me. Why Würzburg, by a large margin, has the largest membership, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 members. The average membership of a Wagner society is more like 100 to 300. That's, I would say, the average membership. As you can see, here's the basic blurb of the Richard Wagner Verband International. But then there was a separate development after the war, a parallel development. In September 1949, again with a review to reviving the festival, the Gesellschaft der Freunde von Bayreuth was founded and contributed a considerable amount for the reopening of the festival in 1951. Today, it continues to play a major role in the existence of the festival, and its main members are mostly German multinational corporations like BASF, BMW, Ferrero, ThyssenKrupp, and wealthy individuals. That's the blurb from its website. So what started in the 1870s as the Patronatverein has basically morphed today into the Gesellschaft der Freunde. And what started in the 1870s as the grassroots Wagner societies still run today, locally independent, but connected to the Richard Wagner Verband International. So that's where I'll end for today, but there are many other issues we could talk about concerning the global marketing of Wagner. Here are some possibilities. How has the performance of Wagner been introduced into new regions of the world? How does Wagner function, or how is Wagner understood in different regions of the world? Are there discernible differences? I'm thinking that perhaps Barbara Mittler might be talking about this next week. What is the relationship of the marketing of Wagner with the advent of recording technology, both audio and video? How do opera companies instrumentalize Wagner to engage in their own self-marketing? So what is the relationship between an opera company's decision to mount a Wagner opera, especially The Ring, and its own desire to market itself as an opera company? There are also projects like the one Matthew Blackmore is pursuing, and there need to be more of those, to look at hard data on the ways in which Wagner became integrated into various markets, as he went from radical revolutionary to being part of the international canon. Maybe we should also look at the use of Wagner as political propaganda, if we accept the idea that Hitler also makes on the similarity between propaganda and advertising. And in closing, I cannot resist, since this is WagnerWorldWide Bayreuth, I have to make a comment that brings us back to Bayreuth, looking ahead at 2013, where we still don't know who is going to be directing the Ring production, which is, on the one hand, potentially catastrophic, but on the other hand, ensures that we continue to talk about Wagner and Bayreuth and the Ring and the festival in the world media. I understand there's going to be a big press conference tomorrow in Berlin, where the issue may still not be resolved. But so on the one hand, it's potentially a fiasco like Tannhäuser in Paris. But on the other hand, it guarantees that the Wagner name and the Wagner issue continues to be discussed globally. So thank you very much. And
Thank you, Nicholas, very, very much for that. Very
and on time too.
interesting.
I was on time.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's just perfect. For that interesting insight into a huge topic, and I thought it was especially fascinating that last aspect you touched, and the relationship between like public relation and public debate, and so the your point you made at the end, that the fact that we don't have a director yet for the Ring is in fact also a good reason for people to still talk about what's going to be happening, and we do a lot of that talking ourselves. Are there questions in the classroom here, maybe first, and then later also, of course, in Columbia? Sven Friedrich. Yes, there is one coming.
First, I tried this. Okay, it works better. First of all, let me thank you very much for your paper, which gives me some deep reflections about my own topic, scenographing Wagner. I will discuss here later. But 2 or 3 points. First of all, I want to try to answer a question you arouse, why the Wagner Society in Würzburg is the biggest one. In fact, the leader, Margot Müller, is very, very busy in collecting Wagnerians, and she owns a car store. And every time when anybody tries to buy a car, she tries to force him to join the Wagner Society first. That's marketing. You in the very beginning you quoted Nietzsche and Nietzsche's reflections upon Wagner's self-marketing. Quoting Nietzsche in this case, of course, means to quote somebody who is deeply affected by Wagner personally, in a very, very deep personal way. And so I think that in Nietzsche's case, you can say when Nietzsche reflects on Wagner, he talks about Nietzsche. This is not unimportant. But I wonder what means talking Wagner when Wagner talks about himself. I don't think that that his aim is to become famous and to collect money and so perhaps a little bit. But I think the aim was art and the artist and the artwork of the future. And of course, the artist of the future is Richard Wagner in his meaning. But the aim, I think, is to create this special artwork, this special art, which includes society, politics, economics, and even religion, a very important aspect in this global idea of Gesamtkunstwerk. And of course, this includes marketing and branding and all these parts. I think that's important, that the aim is not, it is not a selfish one. It is a cultural one, and that makes things different. So art, I think art for Wagner is an instrument, and it's the aim at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. First about Nietzsche, of course, you're absolutely right. And of course, Nietzsche was one of Wagner's greatest marketers early on. So just wanted to make that point. Of course, the issue of intention is one of the first things one can raise, and you're not the first person to bring that up. What were Wagner's intentions? As someone who works with literature, literary studies is my background. I was always reminded by my teachers, and I always try to remind my students, you cannot go with author intention because that's not something that's knowable or provable, and the author themselves don't necessarily know what their intentions were. So I would say it's perhaps best not to talk about intentions either way. I mean, you're perfectly correct to assert if he was being genuine, that he was genuinely engaged with what he was talking about, and I think you're correct. What I'm interested in is really the impact of what it is he did, which doesn't, that's not a question of his intentions, that's a question of what actually happened. And that's really what I'm looking at. And I don't dwell too much on what his intentions were, although I have looked at his letters and he does seem to be torn. Sometimes he's very encouraging of others to promote his line, and sometimes he's embarrassed that they are talking about him so much. So he does seem to be aware that some kind of publicity machine is developing. Yeah. Colombia? Does anyone want to say? Hello.
Hi.
Oh yeah. Is that Tanner? Is that Tanner there?
Yeah, that's Tanner.
Hi, Tanner.
I was just wondering, a point that he just hit on. Would you say that Wagner did look to seek a profit from his operas? Because it seemed that one of his major criticisms of Meyerbeer was that Meyerbeer tried to draw a bigger audience by producing simpler operas in order to create a bigger profit. But did Wagner ever accumulate wealth from his operas?
That's a very good question, actually. Wagner actually addresses this issue. He thought the world simply owed him a living, so he precisely did not want to get rich. He didn't want to get rich off his operas. He wanted to be independently funded, which he actually did manage to do very often. He was from about 1850 on, he had one or another person or group of people was almost permanently funding him, independently of his operas. So certainly in terms of his compositional life, he was not getting rich off his operas. However, in his later life, and certainly after his death, his family profited enormously from the operas. So there are basically two answers to your question, but it's a very good one. And I think precisely because of the lesson of Meyerbeer, he tried to make a point about not wanting to get rich off his operas, but rather that you should simply be funded as a great artist. The world owes me money, he said at one point.
Ja. Bitte fühlen Sie sich auch durchaus aufgefordert, in Deutsch zu fragen, von hier Thomas Betzwieser.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, for that rich paper. I would like to maybe underline one point concerning the marketing strategies of France and Germany, maybe on the differences. We all know that the Tannhäuser thing was the great event in Paris in 1862 something. I'm wondering whether there are differences between the strategies of in Germany and in France. As we all know, there's a huge press in Paris, so maybe we can compare the Paris press system with a huge sound system, let's say. So we have a lot of loudspeakers and we have an amplifier, but as we all know, there is no music without there's missing a component. So if we only have an amplifier and loudspeakers, nothing happens. So, but what has been given in, and I think it was in inverted commas only the performance of Tannhäuser who made this scandal. And then around the scandal, then all this Wagner Vogue began. My question is whether we imagine if this feature, what you have underlined of Geheimkunst, has been given in this sound system of the French system. I'm not quite sure whether that would have function. My question is, do you think that this feature of Geheimkunst, circle and so on, which is a sort of Geheimbund, and this is attractive for people, But whether this is a typical German phenomenon for marketing, or what we call today marketing, I'm not sure whether this would have happened in France, whether at the moment, whether it was a really point around the Tannhäuser event. So problem is the Geheimkunst may be a very German thing for the promotion in Germany. That was the question.
I would say, just to come to your question from a slightly different angle, one of the things that interested me was how it was possible for the French to be so enthusiastic about Wagner, who was so anti-French and so nationally pro-German, especially after 1871. And my answer to that question, I haven't actually read this anywhere, and I don't know if it's true or not, but my sense is that Baudelaire, first of all, Baudelaire was already writing to Wagner. He wrote his letter to Wagner before the Tannhäuser scandal, so he wrote his letter to Wagner after the concerts. And so I think what Baudelaire was doing in France, he would have done with or without the fiasco. I think the fiasco just made Baudelaire more energetic. But Baudelaire is thinking of, Baudelaire really uses Wagner to fight his own battle against French culture. And the entire French avant-garde uses Wagner, i.e. not Wagner, the German composer, but Wagner as someone who embodies a revolutionary aesthetic that they too are also trying to advocate. So I think in France there's also a certain kind of elite art movement that's instrumentalizing Wagner for its own purposes and adopting it for the French cultural scene, so to speak. So I mean, everyone has their own Wagner. And it's quite interesting also to travel around the world and see how differently people talk about Wagner and receive Wagner. So the Wagner that we talk about here in Bayreuth and that you hear at breakfast being talked about, the day after a performance at the Festspielhaus is a very different kind of Wagner from the Wagner you would maybe hear being discussed in San Francisco, for instance. So, I mean, my answer to your question is I think that there are many Wagners and there are many Wagner stories out there in terms of the way he has been appropriated for different cultures.
Gibt es von Ihrer Seite Fragen von den Studierenden vielleicht? Durchaus eben auch auf Deutsch möglich, das wollte ich eben nochmal sagen. Are there any questions here?
You just said that it was important for him to get funded. But do you think that it sort of was important for him to get into society of the rich people, and was it because of that he sort of wanted to become famous, to get into that society and become more important for that society?
It's hard to answer that question except to say that successful artists, and from the time he was in Dresden in 1842, 1843, and he became Kapellmeister in Dresden, he was successful. In many respects, he didn't need to ever be more successful than he was as Kapellmeister. He wanted more for himself, but his wife was certainly very happy with that position. And as soon, in the 19th century, as soon as you were in that position, you automatically circulated with the elite of society. And so maybe one wasn't as wealthy, but one certainly had the contacts. And I think from that moment on, those were the kinds of circles he moved in, either the wealthy of society or in the artist circles. So he had access from very early on. So I think it was the other way around. He used the fact that he had those contacts in order to attract people to his project and get funding. It was a good question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Vazsonyi, for this inspiring talk. I'm speaking from the theater department. I'm a little interested in the relationship between aesthetics on the one hand and marketing on the other hand, because this is what is happening in the current situation in theater, the need to raise new audiences. And I will talk about this later on in the series. So could you elaborate a little more on, because in the beginning you said there's a certain look and a certain sound which we associate to an artwork branded as Wagner, and that's certainly true for the music. I wouldn't say for the performance, and you already made this point. And could you maintain this division between aesthetics and marketing in your argument, or isn't it infecting or affecting the performance very much? Or to put it more provocative, did the Wagner societies raise money to get Wagner composing and performing or mounting his operas, or the other way around?
They got them to raise money so that he
could,
yeah,
just to make money. And maybe that is in the sense of modern performative studies, the performance, the true performance.
Well, I would say I would disagree with your point that there is no Wagner look. That there's only no Wagner in terms of the theater. There's definitely a Wagner look. It's just that with the Regietheater, that falls apart. But I would venture to say you see two people on the stage wearing armor, and one of them is holding a spear, and the other one is a very kind of corpulent lady with blonde hair. You instantly know it's a Wagner opera. So I'd say if Wagner is staged, now I'll go with Sven Friedrich here, if Wagner is staged as intended, I say with quotation marks, there is a very clear look that goes along with the music. And I would say what he did in the 1850s, you talk about attracting an audience. I think the major function of those essays was obviously to explain a certain direction, but also to attract an audience and to make a compelling argument for what he was doing that was different. And he does that. There's the musical pendant to this when he conducts concerts with excerpts from his pieces, again going completely against his own rationale that these works are a unified whole and cannot be broken up. But this is again an attempt to win an audience. So I would say Wagner is all about winning an audience, and you're right. The founding of the Wagner societies, it's in order to, well, you know, what's the chicken and what's the egg? He had a plan for a theater already again in the 1850s, and he wanted actually the public not to have to pay to go to the performances, but the money was going to have to come from somewhere. So the money was always a problem for Wagner, whether it was his own personal finances or the financing of his dreams. And I think he found himself constantly caught between the idealism of something pure. I think he genuinely wanted that. And on the other hand, the practicalities that bills needed to be paid, and also, to answer this student's question, he also enjoyed luxury and wanted to live a very comfortable life. And so it was very important for him that he get funding also for his own person. I don't know if I really adequately addressed your question, because it's a huge one.
Are there any questions, maybe again in Colombia? There's one. Very good. After this one, it's going to be you.
Sorry.
Please.
Hi, Dr. Vazsonyi. I was just wondering, in your opinion, for the future, is the expansion of Wagner marketing extinguishable? Like, do you see that there's a limit since it's already spread to 6 continents, or is it infinite?
It has to be infinite. There can always be more Wagner societies founded, especially in the Middle East and in Africa. I think Africa is a huge untapped market. And we always need more opera, right? No, but seriously, I think that with this project also, the fact that we're on Facebook, the first lecture was uploaded on YouTube last night, guys, by the way. So last week's lecture was on YouTube, now on YouTube. So this is an expansion in the sense of the market. It makes Wagner even more accessible than he was before. Wagner not necessarily as a single operatic performance, but just Wagner as a phenomenon. There's a website, there's a Facebook site called Wagnerians that I just became aware of about 4 weeks ago. It was started by an astrophysics student in Greece. He does astrophysics by day and Wagner by night. And this is a Facebook site with, I think, about 100 members. And I'm almost regretting that I became a member of this site because I would say every half hour or so, someone is uploading something. A YouTube link to a Wagner performance, some photo of something Wagner related that they have. So if I haven't checked email for 3 or 4 hours, which is now again going to be the case, I'm going to have to delete at least 25 Facebook notifications in my email that come just from this one Wagnerian site. So I would say, Vicky, the possibilities are unlimited.
Oh, I was about to ask this one, so. Yeah, okay. I just wonder why especially Wagner is such a big thing. Why it is Wagner who became so famous? Why Wagner is the guy who is such a famous thing?
This is the question I asked myself 10 years ago when I began the whole project. I asked myself exactly the question you're asking. Why is it? Because there were other great composers, right? I mean, Mozart, Beethoven, Verdi, Brahms, I love all of them. What is it about Wagner? And there are many answers to this question. One of them could be that he also had the fortune or misfortune of creating a family that is associated with a specific location and that has taken it upon itself to continue the Wagner legacy in a very big way ever since. So there's an unbroken line since Wagner died that of his family who are continuing the tradition. I don't think one can disregard that as being a significant factor in terms of the noise that we have around the world of the Wagner phenomenon. I also don't think you can discount the fact that he became appropriated politically in the Third Reich with massive consequences, not only during the Third Reich, but then after World War II, that has contributed to a certain sense of scandal about. I mean, the scandal about the Wagner phenomenon since Wagner was alive. There was the Paris Tannhäuser performance. There were other things. There were also various erotic relationships that he was in, or possibly erotic relationships, infidelity. So there was, in terms of the Bild-Zeitung phenomenon, there's also, Wagner was also interesting from that perspective. So there are a lot of things associated with Wagner that go beyond the music. But the music itself is also, and the works themselves are also monumental in a way that few other artists have ever dared to attempt. And so I think it's also perhaps the monumentality of his works that contribute to the special aura that surround him. Having said all of that, my project is to look at the way he marketed himself, because I think that is an unprecedented and to a certain extent unique story. And, sorry, not just the way he marketed himself, but the point I also tried to make today, which is that very early on and somehow he managed to get, or people volunteered to participate in that effort. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that question as well. I keep an eye on you guys in Colombia, so make sure you do something so we know that you want to ask a question. I have a question, and that relates a little bit to what you were asking before, and also to your answer talking about Africa and the YouTube. Of course, also like the Operndorf project by Schlingensief is also some kind of new spread of like the idea what Wagner came up with. So that would be, I think, also an answer, and we will be touching on this later in the lecture series. I really loved your talk about, really loved the moment in your talk when you were talking about Wagner talking, you know. Because in a general sense, we heard a lot about like what was the outcome of Wagner's strategies, but you didn't describe so much the actual strategies, but starting with just the fact that he was talking about himself and his art a lot. And I would like to look maybe again at that quotation of that Ulich letter, which is very strange. The Ude, pardon. Yeah, yes. Yeah. I mean, could you interpret this a little bit further? Because what's so strange about this is, I mean, how would he have felt about this Ulich? That's what I asked myself. Being addressed like that, you know, and maybe even, you know, wanting to talk more about Wagner, and to other people, because that's basically the intention, maybe. Do we have an answer actually to that letter? That would be the concrete question.
I wish that we had an answer not only to this letter but to all the other letters, because between 1850 and 1852 Wagner and Ulich must have been an unbelievable correspondence, but we only have Wagner's side of it because all of Ulich's letters were burned. All of Ulich's letters to Wagner. And so we have no idea what he said, and it would have been actually very important for my own book to know what Ulich said in response to a lot of things, because it's precisely the intentions. I think intentions are clearer in letters than they are in a completed artwork. And you ask, you know, you use the word strategy, and I'm very reluctant to use the word strategy, because the word strategy implies a plan and, again, intention. And I wouldn't want to say that Wagner had a marketing strategy. I'm pretty sure that he didn't. I'm pretty sure that it's just like Sven says, he was genuinely committed to his artwork. He was trying to do something new, or at least convince the world that he was doing something new, and he wanted to let the world know about it. I think the consequence was, or the side benefit, or the result was that it worked. It had the effect of being a marketing campaign. But I wouldn't want to say that it was a strategy. Franz Brendel, I think, had a strategy, which is that he had a direction for the Neue Zeitschrift für Musik. Wagner was the perfect, what's the word I'm looking for? The perfect vehicle to realize the direction he wanted to take his magazine in, his journal in, and he found Ulich as the perfect person to write about Wagner. So from Brendel's point of view, there was a strategy. In terms of this letter, I think Wagner was genuinely embarrassed on occasion when there was a lot of talk about him. But I think he was conflicted, because I think he also enjoyed the attention. So I think he was torn. This letter in particular, I think, or this comment, is a joke. Ulich was also, by all accounts, as anti-Semitic as Wagner was. I mean, Wagner was not alone as being an anti-Semitic in the middle of the 19th century. It's just, once again, he wrote a lot about it. And because of history, we read Das Judentum in der Musik. We don't read Ulich's essays on Meyerbeer's Le Prophète, which have an unbelievable string of anti-Semitic comments in them. But who cares? Because who was Ulich, you know? So we don't talk about it. And those were written about 6 months before Das Judentum in der Musik. And a lot of the, I'm kind of going off your question a little bit, but a lot of the phraseology in Das Judentum in der Musik comes straight from Ulich. And my contention is, my hunch is that in their correspondence with each other, which we don't have complete, they probably made jokes about that back and forth. So we don't know what Ulich's anti-Semitic comments are. We only know Wagner's anti-Semitic comment. So, you know, whether Wagner was responding to something Ulich had said, or Ulich has, you know, and what, we just don't know. So I think this is meant to be a joke, but I think behind every joke lies a kernel of truth. And so we get a little bit of the schizophrenia that Wagner exhibits between wanting to be pushed, to Haeckel, for instance, Emil Haeckel in 1871, he writes a letter saying, wir müssen diese Sache wirklich in die Öffentlichkeit bringen und pushen. He doesn't use the word pushen, but he says, wir müssen, it's Feuer thing, he uses the word Feuer, damit niemand sagen kann, ich habe nichts davon gehört. So when it comes to the Bayreuth Festival, for instance, he's very, very energetic about wanting as much publicity as possible. And then at the same time, he doesn't want the Wagner societies to be called Wagner societies. You know, so it's schizophrenic.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions here or maybe there?
Well, speaking, I'm afraid, from some ignorance on a lot of this, it does strike me that perhaps this begins as the promotion of an aesthetic, and it ends up being the promotion of great works of art. I mean, does anything of the aesthetic survive in the end, more or less from the time of the 1870s, or is that somehow quietly dropped? I mean, are we just into the program of getting operas performed, or does something still survive from those often odd pronouncements of the earlier time? I mean, are these societies actually promoting ideas anymore, or just works of art?
I would say they are promoting ideas, but the ideas change. I think they become increasingly politicized, especially in the 1870s and 1880s. Wagner becomes associated with the national undertaking. I mean, they even use the word national undertaking. And so it all gets, I think, confused and mixed up with each other. Does Wagner still talk about the aesthetics, I think is also the question. And when I think about Wagner's essays from the late 1870s and early 1880s, it's much less so. I mean, he's either writing about the organizational issues of the festival, or he's writing ideological essays that are much more broadly conceived and which have actually gotten him into trouble subsequently, because they lead quite comfortably into the right-wing movement of the later 19th, early 20th century. So the tenor of the 1850s essays, which are much more focused on aesthetics, although they also do contain some kind of a political program, I think the two are really inseparable. And that tradition really comes from Schiller in the late 18th century. That the emphasis certainly has changed by the 1870s. Okay.
Very, very short question. What was Wagner's opinion or his relationship concerning the Liszt circle in Weimar? There were many people doing much advertising around Liszt. So what was his opinion about this? I think he was a bit skeptical, but maybe not.
You know, without Liszt, we probably wouldn't be talking about Wagner the way we do today. He certainly didn't like Liszt to begin with in Paris in the 1840s, and I think he was also conflicted when it came to Liszt. I'm not sure how much he really respected Liszt as a composer at all. And as a performer, I think he also thought Liszt was too much of a clown. So, but I think he was very grateful for the money and for the promotion. I mean, Liszt also funded him. And many members, as you say, many members of Liszt's Weimar circle were also very much involved in promoting Wagner. But, you know, there was someone like Joachim Raff, for instance. But he kept some distance. He did. He kept distance. Also, I mean, Joachim Raff wrote this thing called Die Wagner-Frage, which was a very important, in a sense, in 1854. But Wagner also ridiculed it in letters. So it's a very interesting question, but you're right, there was a distance there.
Unfortunately, we have to kind of like cut this off, but there's more opportunity to talk about this or write about this on Facebook within the next week. So thank you so much in Colombia.
Bye, guys.
You know, but see you hopefully again next week when Barbara Mittler will be talking about Wagner Goes East, Chinese Encounters with European Opera. And I do, before we leave and go for our little reception, unfortunately you can't be there. I do want to thank Nicholas for an excellent talk. Thank you so much. This was really very, very, very nice, fascinating. Thank you. Thank you. And see you all next week.